Marry me, Jade, because I can't bear the thought of you with anyone else. Elliot's words hung in the air, heavy with expectation. I stared at him, my mind racing. The restaurant around us faded into a blur of white tablecloths and flickering candles. Elliot, My voice trailed off. I couldn't find the words. He reached across the table, grasping my hand. I know your career means everything to you. But we can make this work. I promise. I looked into his eyes, seeing a mixture of hope and fear. My heart raced, torn between the comfort of his love and the allure of my hard-earned independence. My name is Jade, and I never thought I'd be here, on the precipice of such a life-altering decision. Yes, I heard myself say, almost in a whisper. Yes, I'll marry you. Elliot's face lit up with joy. He slipped a ring onto my finger, a diamond that caught the light, beautiful and somehow terrifying. As we left the restaurant, my phone buzzed. A text from my boss. Big project coming up. Need you to lead. I hesitated, then put the phone away. Elliot squeezed my hand. Everything okay? Fine, I lied, forcing a smile. Just work stuff. At home, I called my mother. Mom, I have news. Jade, what's wrong? Gloria's voice was instantly concerned. Nothing's wrong. Elliot proposed. I said yes. There was a pause, then a squeal of delight. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. When's the wedding? What are you wearing? Oh, we have so much to plan. I laughed, her excitement infectious. Mom, slow down. We just got engaged. I'm just so happy for you, sweetie. You deserve this. As we talked, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different. Engaged. Soon to be married. Was I ready for this? The next morning, I woke to Elliot making breakfast. Good morning, fiancé, he said, grinning. Fiancé, I repeated, testing the word. It felt foreign on my tongue. As I sipped my coffee, Elliot said, I was thinking we should have dinner with my parents this weekend, to announce the engagement. I nearly choked. This weekend? Isn't that a bit soon? He frowned. Why wait? They'll be thrilled. I thought about Walter and Lorraine Mercer, with their traditional values and judgmental glances. Sure, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. This weekend it is. At work, I threw myself into the new project, grateful for the distraction. My colleague Sarah noticed the ring immediately. Oh my God, Jade. Congratulations. She hugged me tightly. So, when's the big day? We haven't set a date yet, I said, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. Sarah's smile faltered. You okay? You don't seem very excited. I am, I insisted. It's just a lot to process. As I dove into work, my phone buzzed again. A text from Elliot. Mom's planning a big dinner for Saturday. Can't wait for you to be part of the family. I stared at the message, a knot forming in my stomach. Part of the family. The Mercer family. Was I ready for that? That night, as Elliot slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I loved him, I truly did. But as I thought about the future, our future, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I touched the ring on my finger, cool and unfamiliar. It's just nerves, I whispered to myself. Everything will be fine. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered. Will it? The Mercer mansion loomed before us, a Victorian monstrosity that seemed to frown at our arrival. Elliot squeezed my hand reassuringly as we approached the front door. Ready, he asked. I nodded, forcing a smile. As I'll ever be. Walter Mercer opened the door, his stern face softening slightly at the sight of his son. Elliot, good to see you. His gaze shifted to me, eyes narrowing. Jade. Mr. Mercer, I said, extending my hand. He shook it briefly, his grip firm and cold. Lorraine appeared behind him, all pearls and perfume. There's my boy, she exclaimed, embracing Elliot. She turned to me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Jade, dear. How lovely. As we entered the dining room, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking into a lion's den. The table was set with fine china and crystal, a clear reminder of the world I was marrying into. So, Jade, Lorraine began as we settled into our seats. Elliot tells us you're quite the career woman. I nodded, swallowing a bite of salad. Yes, I'm a project manager at. How fascinating, she interrupted, her tone suggesting it was anything but. And do you plan to continue working after the wedding? Elliot shifted uncomfortably beside me. I felt a flicker of annoyance at his silence. Of course, I replied firmly. My career is very important to me. Walter harumphed from the head of the table. In my day, a woman's most important job was taking care of her family. I bit my tongue, reminding myself to play nice. Times have changed, Mr. Mercer. Many women successfully balance career and family now. Lorraine's lips thinned. Perhaps. But surely you'll want to start a family soon? Elliot isn't getting any younger. Mom, Elliot protested weakly. I forced a laugh. We haven't really discussed that yet. We're just enjoying being engaged. The conversation mercifully shifted to wedding plans. Though Lorraine's pointed comments about traditional values and a proper family wedding grated on my nerves. As dessert was served, Walter cleared his throat. Elliot, my boy, have you given any more thought to joining the family business? Elliot tensed beside me. Dad, we've talked about this. I'm happy where I am. Nonsense, Walter scoffed. It's time you took on some real responsibility. You can't keep coasting along in that entry-level position forever. I frowned. Entry-level? Elliot had told me he was on track for a promotion. Actually, I interjected, Elliot's been working really hard. He's up for a big project next month that could lead to. Jade, Elliot cut me off, his voice strained. Let's not bore them with work talk. I stared at him, hurt and confused. Why was he dismissing my support? As we prepared to leave, Lorraine pulled me aside. Jade, dear, a word of advice. A happy marriage requires sacrifice. You might want to reconsider your priorities. I bristled at her words, but managed a polite nod. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Mercer. In the car, the tension between Elliot and me was palpable. Why didn't you tell me about the family business? I asked. Elliot sighed. It's complicated, Jade. My father's always pushing for things I don't want. And why did you stop me from defending you? He shrugged. It's easier to just let them talk sometimes. I fell silent, mulling over the evening. The Mercer's judgment, Elliot's passivity, the lies by omission, it all left a sour taste in my mouth. As we pulled into our driveway, Elliot reached for my hand. Hey, it wasn't so bad, right? They'll warm up to you, I promise. I forced a smile, but inside doubts were growing. Was this the family I was marrying into? And more importantly, was Elliot the man I thought he was? As I lay in bed that night, Elliot's soft snores beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of a precipice, about to take a leap into the unknown. And for the first time since his proposal, I wasn't sure if I was ready to jump. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and clear, but the knot in my stomach tightened with each passing hour. As I stood before the mirror in my white gown, my mother, Gloria, appeared behind me, her eyes glistening with tears. You look beautiful, sweetheart, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I turned to face her, taking in the familiar scar that ran along her cheek, a reminder of the car accident that had nearly taken her from me years ago. Thanks, Mom. I just wish. She squeezed my hand. I know. Your father would have been so proud. A knock at the door interrupted our moment. It was Max, looking dapper in his suit. Hey, Jade. You ready? I nodded, forcing a smile. As I'll ever be. The ceremony was a blur of faces, flowers, and promises. Elliot beamed at me as we exchanged vows, but I couldn't shake the nagging doubt that had taken root since our dinner with his parents. At the reception, I made my rounds, accepting congratulations and trying to ignore the whispers that seemed to follow in my wake. It wasn't until I overheard a conversation near the bar that I realized the source of the gossip. Did you see the mother of the bride? A woman's voice said, dripping with disdain. That scar is simply ghastly. You'd think she'd have had it fixed before such an important day. I froze, recognizing the speaker as Lila, Elliot's sister. Her companion, another of Elliot's relatives, tittered in agreement. I know, Lila continued. It's a shame. Poor Elliot, having to look at that every holiday now. White-hot anger surged through me. I spun around, ready to confront them, but Elliot appeared at my side, oblivious to the tension. There you are, darling, he said, pulling me close. Come, my parents want a photo. I allowed myself to be led away, my mind reeling. How could Lila be so cruel? And why hadn't Elliot noticed? As we posed for pictures, Lorraine fussed over Elliot's tie. There, perfect, she cooed. Now you look like a proper Mercer man. I bristled at her words, remembering her comments about my career. Elliot just smiled, basking in his mother's approval. The rest of the reception passed in a haze of toasts, dances, and forced smiles. I kept catching glimpses of Lila, whispering and giggling with her friends, occasionally casting glances in my direction. As the night wore on, I found myself at a table with Gloria, both of us taking a moment of respite from the festivities. You okay, honey? She asked, concern etching her features. You seem distracted. I hesitated, not wanting to burden her with my worries on what should be a joyous day. I'm fine, Mom. Just tired. She studied me for a moment, unconvinced. You know you can tell me anything, right? If something's bothering you. Before I could respond, Elliot appeared, flushed with champagne and excitement. Come on, Mrs. Mercer, he said, pulling me to my feet. Time for our last dance. As we swayed on the dance floor, Elliot's arms around me, I tried to recapture the love and certainty I'd felt when he proposed. But all I could think about was Lila's cruel words, Lorraine's judgmental gaze, and the growing fear that I'd made a terrible mistake. I love you, Elliot murmured in my ear. I love you too, I replied automatically, the words feeling hollow in my mouth. As the music faded and guests began to depart, I caught sight of Max across the room. He met my gaze, a question in his eyes. I looked away quickly, unable to face the concern I saw there. Later, as Elliot and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon, I hugged Gloria tightly. I love you, Mom, I whispered fiercely. I love you too, sweetheart, she replied. Be happy. As we drove away, rice and confetti trailing behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving more than just my single life behind. With each mile that passed, the weight of my new reality settled over me like a shroud. I was Mrs. Elliot Mercer now, but at what cost? 6 months into our marriage, the honeymoon phase had long since faded. I stood in our kitchen, staring at the invitation to yet another Mercer family dinner, my stomach churning with dread. Jade, have you RSVP'd to Mother's dinner yet? Elliot called from the living room. I sighed, setting down my coffee mug. Not yet. I've got a big presentation that week, remember? Elliot appeared in the doorway, frowning. Can't you reschedule? You know how important these dinners are to my family. And you know how important this project is to my career, I countered, frustration building. He ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. Jade, we've talked about this. Maybe it's time to start thinking about scaling back at work. I froze, disbelief washing over me. Excuse me. It's just, Mother was saying the other day that it might be nice if you were home more. You know, to start thinking about our future. The implication hung heavy in the air. Children. The topic we'd been dancing around for months. Elliot, we agreed we'd wait a few years before even considering kids. I said, my voice tight. He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Things change. We're not getting any younger, and what? Your mother thinks it's time. I snapped, anger flaring. Elliot's face hardened. Don't talk about her like that. She only wants what's best for us. I laughed bitterly. For us? Or for you? The argument escalated, ending with Elliot storming out and me left seething in the kitchen. As I aggressively wiped down the counters, my phone buzzed. A text from Lorraine. Darling, do try to make it to dinner. We have so much to discuss about your role in the family. I nearly threw the phone across the room. At work the next day, I buried myself in the project, grateful for the distraction. As I was leaving the office, I ran into Max, my old friend who worked as a police officer in the building next door. Jade, long time no see, he said, his warm smile a balm to my frayed nerves. We grabbed coffee, and I found myself pouring out my frustrations. Max listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. Jade, I hate to see you like this. This isn't the confident woman I grew up with. His words hit home, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. I don't know what to do, Max. I feel like I'm losing myself. He squeezed my hand reassuringly. You're stronger than you think, Jade. Don't let anyone dim your light. That evening, I returned home to find Elliot and Lila in deep conversation on our couch. They fell silent as I entered, exchanging guilty looks. What's going on? I asked, suspicion rising. Elliot cleared his throat. Lila was just giving me some advice. About us. I turned to Lila, whose smug expression made my blood boil. Oh, and what pearls of wisdom does my sister-in-law have about my marriage? Lila stood, smoothing her designer dress. Just that sometimes sacrifices need to be made for family. Isn't that right, Elliot? Elliot nodded, avoiding my gaze. Lila thinks, maybe we should reconsider your work situation. For the sake of our future. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. You've been talking to her about our private life? Don't be dramatic, Jade, Lila said, her voice sickly sweet. We're family now. There are no secrets. As they continued to talk, their voices faded into background noise. I saw with sudden clarity the web I'd become entangled in, Lorraine's manipulation, Lila's jealousy, and Elliot's weakness. That night, as Elliot slept beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing. The woman I'd been before the wedding felt like a distant memory. But somewhere inside, a spark of defiance flickered to life. I was Jade Thornton before I was Mrs. Mercer. And it was time to remember who that woman was. The Mercer family's annual summer barbecue was in full swing, the sprawling backyard of their mansion filled with laughter and chatter. I stood by the buffet table, nursing a glass of wine and trying to ignore the suffocating feeling of being an outsider in my own family. Elliot appeared at my side, his smile strained. "Having fun, darling?" Before I could answer, Walter's booming voice cut through the crowd. "Elliot, my boy, come here, I want you to meet someone." As Elliot dutifully trotted off, I caught Lila's smirk from across the lawn. She was in her element, holding court with a group of cousins, no doubt spreading more gossip about me. Lorraine glided over, her perfectly coiffed hair unmoved by the summer breeze. "Jade, dear, why don't you help me in the kitchen? We need more of my famous potato salad." I gritted my teeth, knowing it wasn't a request. In the kitchen, as I mechanically stirred the bowl, Lorraine launched into her usual passive-aggressive commentary. "You know, Jade, I was speaking with Mrs. Hawthorne earlier. Her daughter just had the most adorable twins. Wouldn't it be lovely if you and Elliot—" I set the spoon down with more force than necessary. "Lorraine, we've discussed this. Elliot and I aren't ready for children yet." She pursed her lips. "Well, dear, you're not getting any younger. And with your career, I just worry you're missing out on life's true joys." I bit back a retort, reminding myself to keep the peace. But as we rejoined the party, I felt my resolve crumbling. Walter cornered me by the grill, his imposing figure blocking my escape. "So, Jade, Elliot tells me you're still working those long hours. Don't you think it's time to start focusing on more important things?" I forced a polite smile. "My career is important to me, Walter." He waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. A woman's place is in the home, supporting her husband. Isn't that right, Elliot?" I turned, not realizing Elliot had joined us. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "Well, Dad, times are different now." Walter scoffed. "Different? In my day, we knew the value of family. Elliot, it's time you put your foot down. Tell your wife to quit that job and start being a proper Mercer woman." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at Elliot, willing him to defend me, to stand up to his father. But he remained silent, his eyes fixed on his shoes. Something inside me snapped. "I think I can speak for myself, Walter," I said, my voice sharp. "My career isn't just a hobby. It's part of who I am." Walter's face reddened. "Now see here, young lady." "No, you see here," I interrupted, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. "I won't be bullied into giving up my dreams. Not by you, not by Lorraine, and certainly not by Elliot." The party had gone quiet, all eyes on our confrontation. Lila stood nearby, her expression a mix of shock and glee. I turned to Elliot, my voice breaking. "Are you going to say anything? Or are you going to let your father disrespect me?" Again. Elliot opened his mouth, then closed it, looking torn. His silence was all the answer I needed. "I see," I said quietly. Then, louder. "Well, I think I've overstayed my welcome. Thank you all for a lovely afternoon." I strode towards the house, ignoring the whispers and stares. In our bedroom, I threw clothes into a suitcase, tears blurring my vision. Elliot burst in. "Jade, wait. Where are you going?" I zipped up the suitcase, my hands shaking. "Home. To my mother's." "I can't do this anymore, Elliot. I won't lose myself to please your family." "But we can work this out," he pleaded. I paused at the door, looking back at the man I'd thought would be my partner in life. "Can we? Because from where I'm standing, you've already chosen your side." As I drove away from the Mercer mansion, my wedding ring heavy on my finger, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. The life I'd thought I wanted was crumbling around me, but for the first time in months, I could breathe. A week after I left Elliot, I sat in my childhood bedroom at my mother's house, staring at my phone. 17 missed calls from Elliot. 23 text messages. I hadn't responded to any of them. A soft knock on the door broke my reverie. "Jade, honey." My mother's voice was gentle. "Elliot's here." My heart raced. "Tell him I don't want to see him. He says he's not leaving until you talk to him." I sighed, steeling myself. "Fine. I'll be down in a minute." Elliot stood in the living room, looking disheveled and exhausted. When he saw me, his eyes lit up with hope. "Jade," he breathed. "Thank God. I've been so worried." I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Elliot?" He took a step towards me, then seemed to think better of it. "I want you to come home. We can work this out, I promise." I laughed bitterly. "Work what out? The fact that you let your family walk all over me? That you didn't stand up for me when your father insulted me in front of everyone?" Elliot ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "You know how my father is. I didn't want to make a scene." "A scene?" I repeated incredulously. Your father publicly humiliated me, and you're worried about making a scene? That's not fair, Jade. You know how important family is to me. And what about me? I shot back. Aren't I your family now? Or do I always come second to your parents and Lila? At the mention of Lila's name, Elliot flinched. I narrowed my eyes, a suspicion forming. What's going on with Lila, Elliot? Why have you been confiding in her about our marriage? He looked away, guilt written across his face. She's my sister. She understands our family dynamics. She understands? I scoffed. She's been feeding your doubts about me from day one. Can't you see that? Before Elliot could respond, the front door burst open. Lila stormed in, her face flushed with anger. There you are, she spat at Elliot. I can't believe you came crawling back to her. I stared at her in disbelief. How dare you barge into my mother's house? Lila ignored me, focusing on Elliot. After everything we've talked about, after all the plans we made. Lila, stop, Elliot pleaded, panic in his eyes. But Lila was on a roll, years of pent-up jealousy and resentment pouring out. You promised me, Elliot. You said once Jade was out of the picture, we could finally be together. That you'd take your rightful place in the family business, with me by your side. The room fell silent. I felt as if all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. What is she talking about, Elliot? I whispered. Elliot's face crumpled. Jade, I can explain. But Lila wasn't finished. She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with malice. Did you really think you belonged in our world? You were never good enough for Elliot or our family. I made sure he saw that. I staggered back, the full weight of the betrayal hitting me. You've been manipulating this entire situation. Both of you. Elliot reached for me. Jade, please. It's not what you think. I jerked away from his touch. Don't. Just. Don't. Lila laughed, the sound cold and cruel. Oh, come on, Jade. Did you really think a career-obsessed nobody like you could ever fit into our family? I did you a favor. Something inside me snapped. Years of enduring snide comments, of trying to fit into a world that never wanted me, of compromising myself for a man who couldn't even stand up for me. It all came rushing to the surface. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Both of you. Get out of my mother's house. Get out of my life. Elliot's face fell. Jade, please. I love you. I met his gaze, feeling nothing but a cold, empty void where my love for him used to be. No, Elliot. You love the idea of me. The version of me your family wanted. But that person doesn't exist. As Elliot and Lila left, their voices raised in argument, I sank onto the couch, my whole body shaking. My mother appeared, wrapping her arms around me. Oh, sweetheart, she murmured. I'm so sorry. I leaned into her embrace, feeling both shattered and strangely liberated. The life I had built with Elliot lay in ruins around me. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The days following Elliot and Lila's dramatic exit blurred together. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction, but the weight of betrayal hung heavy on my shoulders. One evening, as I sat on my mother's porch, staring blankly at the setting sun, a familiar voice broke through my reverie. Thought I might find you here. I looked up to see Max, my childhood friend, standing at the bottom of the steps. His police uniform was rumpled, his expression a mix of concern and something I couldn't quite place. Max, I said, managing a weak smile. What are you doing here? He climbed the steps, settling beside me on the porch swing. Your mom called. She's worried about you. I sighed, leaning back. I'm fine. Max raised an eyebrow. Really? Because you look like hell, Jade. A laugh escaped me, surprising us both. Always the charmer, Max. His face softened. Want to talk about it? And suddenly I did. The whole story came pouring out. The proposal, the wedding, the slow erosion of my self-esteem, and finally, the devastating revelation of Elliot and Lila's betrayal. Max listened intently, his jaw clenching as I recounted Lila's cruel words. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I wish I could say I'm surprised, he finally said. I turned to him, confused. What do you mean? Max ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. Look, there's something you should know about the Mercers. Specifically about Lorraine. My heart rate picked up. What about her? A few years back, there was an incident. Nothing that made the papers, but... He hesitated. Lorraine's behavior drove Elliot's previous fiancé to attempt suicide. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? Max nodded grimly. The girl's name was Sarah. Sweet kid, a lot like you actually. Career-focused, independent. Lorraine. She didn't approve. Started playing mind games, turning the family against her. By the end, Sarah was a shell of herself. I remembered the whispers at family gatherings, the vague references to Elliot's troubled ex. It all suddenly made horrifying sense. Why didn't anyone tell me? I whispered. The Mercers are good at keeping secrets. And honestly, I think most people were too afraid of Lorraine to speak up. A cold fury began to build in my chest. So they just let history repeat itself? Let me walk into that snake pit. Max reached out, squeezing my hand. I'm sorry, Jade. I should have said something sooner. I didn't want to believe they'd do it again. I stood abruptly, pacing the porch. All this time, I thought there was something wrong with me. That I wasn't good enough, that I needed to try harder. There's nothing wrong with you, Jade, Max said firmly. The Mercers are the problem. They've been doing this for years, manipulating people, tearing families apart. I stopped pacing, a realization dawning. That's why you became a cop, isn't it? To protect people from families like the Mercers. Max nodded, a sad smile on his face. Someone has to stand up to them. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but alongside them, a new emotion was taking root: determination. You're right, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Someone does have to stand up to them. And I think it's time that someone was me. Max stood, his eyes searching mine. What are you thinking? A plan was already forming in my mind. I'm thinking it's time the truth about the Mercers came to light. All of it. Jade, Max said cautiously, the Mercers are powerful. This won't be easy. I met his gaze, feeling more like myself than I had in months. I know, but I'm done being a victim. It's time to fight back. Max studied me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, if you're sure about this, I'm with you. Whatever you need. As we stood there on the porch, the last rays of sunlight fading, I felt a surge of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since my ill-fated wedding day, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The Mercers had tried to break me. Instead, they'd made me stronger. And now they were about to learn just how strong I could be. 1 year later, I stood at the podium, surveying the packed auditorium. Journalists, community leaders, and familiar faces filled the seats. In the front row, my mother beamed proudly, her scar a badge of survival. Beside her sat Max, his supportive smile giving me strength. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady. Today, we're here to announce the launch of the Phoenix Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of emotional abuse and manipulation. As I spoke about the Foundation's mission, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The months following my separation from Elliot had been challenging, but they'd also been transformative. With Max's help, I'd gathered evidence of the Mercers' pattern of manipulation and abuse. Sarah, Elliot's ex-fiancée, had come forward with her story, along with others who'd been silenced by the family's influence. Our goal, I continued, is to provide resources, counseling, and legal support to those trapped in toxic family dynamics. No one should have to sacrifice their identity or dreams to fit someone else's mold. As I spoke, I noticed a commotion at the back of the auditorium. Elliot slipped in, looking haggard and uncertain. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a mix of regret and admiration in his gaze. I nodded slightly, acknowledging his presence before continuing. The Mercer family's actions have finally come to light, I said, my voice growing stronger. Their company is under investigation for ethical violations, and Lorraine Mercer is facing charges for her role in Sarah's breakdown. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I took a deep breath, ready to deliver the final blow. But this isn't about revenge. It's about justice, healing, and preventing others from experiencing what we went through. It's about reclaiming our power and helping others do the same. As I concluded my speech, the auditorium erupted in applause. I stepped away from the podium, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Max met me at the edge of the stage, enveloping me in a warm embrace. You did it, Jade, he whispered. I'm so proud of you. Later, as the crowd thinned, Elliot approached cautiously. Jade, I don't know what to say. I studied him, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the slump in his shoulders. You don't have to say anything, Elliot. Your actions speak for themselves. He nodded, looking pained. I know. I've made so many mistakes. But seeing you up there, so strong and determined, it made me realize how much I've lost. Not just you, but myself. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old affection. But it was quickly replaced by a calm resolve. I hope you find your way, Elliot. But it won't be with me. As he walked away, Max appeared at my side. You okay? I turned to him, really looking at the man who'd stood by me through everything. Yeah, I am. Better than okay, actually. He grinned, that boyish smile I'd known since childhood. Good, because I was thinking, maybe we could grab dinner? To celebrate, I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a feeling of possibility I hadn't experienced in a long time. I'd like that, Max. I'd like that a lot. As we left the auditorium, hand in hand, I caught sight of my reflection in a window. The woman staring back at me was stronger, wiser, and more herself than she'd ever been. The Mercers had tried to break me, to mold me into their idea of perfection. Instead, they'd set me free. Walking into the warm evening air, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was excited to see where it might lead. With Max by my side and my newfound purpose guiding me, I was ready to embrace whatever came next. The Phoenix Foundation was just the beginning. From the ashes of my old life, something beautiful and powerful had risen. And this time, nothing and no one would clip my wings again.